Welcome to Technology and Security. TS is a podcast exploring the intersections of emerging technologies and national security. I'm your host, Dr. Miah Hammond-Errey. My guest today is Carmen Medina. Carmen is a globally recognized expert in intelligence analysis, strategic thinking, diversity of thought, and innovation. She's spent over 30 years in the US intelligence community. She was part of the leadership team of the CIA's Analysis Directorate and the recipient of the Distinguished Career Intelligence Medal. She's the co-author of Rebels at Work, a handbook for leading change from within. Her story as a change agent at CIA is the subject of her TED Talk and was featured in Adam Grant's bestseller originals, How Nonconformists Move the World. Thank you for coming on this edition of Technology and Security, Carmen.
Well, thanks for having me.
We're coming to you today from the lands of the Gadigal people. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge their continuing connection to land, sea, and community. President Trump has taken office again, and it looks set to be a time of global change and uncertainty. I want to kick us off today by asking you how intelligence and national security leaders can make big political and geopolitical transitions manageable for their teams and organizations.
It's a hard question. For anyone who's got more than 10 years of experience, this is not their first rodeo. If you've been with the intelligence community for 10 years, you went from Obama to Trump, Trump to Biden, and now Biden back to Trump. In an ideal world, the transition to a different administration, it should not have a significant impact on the intelligence officer because the intelligence officer's work should be the same process regardless of who's in office. So we're trying to uncover and get as close to reality as we possibly can. That should not be affected by ideology. That's in an idealized world. In the world that we actually live in, almost everybody approaches reality by kind of using their ideological framework first to interpret reality. And then if they don't have a strong ideological or philosophical view, then they're open to facts. So this is kind of a fundamental problem in intelligence as it's designed. You often hear people talk about how intelligence officers should speak truth to power. I've never liked that phrase. One, I don't think we have some magical formula for getting to the truth. And two, it implies that when power hears truth, they stop, which is not true. They don't. I mean, they might, but there's no reason necessarily why they should. And this is totally nonpartisan. This affects every administration. So I think you have to focus on fundamentals. You have to tell the ones who've had this experience before have to really work hard with their emotional and social intelligence in reassuring people because it is hard. I think this one's going to be harder than others because there are people in the Trump administration who are saying things that appear on face value to run counter to decades of Western and U.S. tradition in terms of how we conduct ourselves from a national security perspective. But, there's a lot of bombast in politics, so I think we have to observe very carefully.
This does look from the outside like quite a profound shift for institutions in the United States, for, democratic processes, for just norms, basic international affairs norms and behaviors from an international relations perspective. Many of the traditional norms around diplomacy and foreign relations are changing, and that will impact intelligence indirectly or directly.
Now, if I can just refer to something, we just finished an episode of my little YouTube channel where we interviewed Sue Gordon, the former Deputy Director of National Intelligence. One of the things she says, and I agree with it, is the international system that we've built for many decades is breaking. I think she uses the phrase that the bedrock is cracking. And that doesn't have to be bad. It could be that we can build something better. It probably is the case that some things need to break, but it's an extremely difficult time to live through and particularly to work through. you can't pretend that these tensions aren't there. You sort of have to acknowledge them, and you have to do the work to get through them. That's why so many managers and leaders and individuals are lacking in emotional and social intelligence, because emotional and social intelligence is not like fairy dust that people sprinkle on you. Emotional and social intelligence is hard work, hard conversations, strong listening skills. And the only way you're going to get through these situations is to do the work.
I have a new segment in 2025. It's called the Contest Spectrum. And what's a new cooperation, competition, or conflict you see coming in 2025?
So cooperation, I think that we, the United States, has to do more to sort of explore the edges of all the traditional disciplines that we've been engaged in. So like scientific disciplines. And I think we've got to, artificial intelligence is kind of forcing the issue. Quantum is sort of forcing the issue. And I think that we need to collaborate more with academia, with each other, with the people outside the academic spectrum that haven't normally been considered useful people to collaborate with, to really explore edge sciences. I think that the advent of the digital age has led to a tremendous decline in popular support and the legitimacy of democratic governments. So the collaboration that I think we need to have is a collaboration in experimenting with radical openness and in including in the conversation disciplines, individuals that we might actually have believed or perhaps even still believe are kind of too crazy to be part of this conversation. So I think that is a very interesting collaboration, and wouldn't surprise me to see some movement in that direction.
Let's go to some of the intelligence questions. What are the biggest changes you've seen in your career in intelligence?
I'm really trying to think of something that has changed a lot. For sure, from when I started in 1978 until today, the composition of the people in the who work on intelligence is quite different. The intelligence community has become quite diverse. CIA, DIA, NSA, quite diverse. Not diverse enough. And here I'm not talking about any kind of legacy diversity. I'm talking about diversity of thought. Frankly, we don't hire enough crazy thinkers. And you need crazy thinkers that are attracted to the edge and want to look over and see what's down there, even if there's a danger that they're going to fall, right? And the other thing that has changed about the intelligence community, and this is not a change in a good way, is that when I started out, we were the cutting edge of technology. In 2025, the intelligence community and government in general is no longer the cutting edge of technology. We are scrambling to even stay like within the same decade of the technology edge. And I think that's dangerous.
Do you see any alternatives to the current system, which is essentially try to buy that technology from outside?
Government, as we currently practice it, is just not organized for creativity. It is organized for execution. And I think we're in the age of technology where creativity seems to matter more than execution.
That's a really good point.
People are willing to kind of take chances. There was no roadmap on how, not that I know of, on how AI was going to develop, right? It's been like one creative turn after another. And government's just not organized to do that. So I always wonder when I say things like this, well, what about China? What does that mean? What does that mean? Because China, there's a third word we need to have in there is control. So there's control, creativity, execution. And China seems to be very much, and I think you all in Australia, I'm sure have a more nuanced view on this than the average American. But China is conducting a really remarkable social experiment on how to kind of build a modern society. Where the West has kind of gotten into decentralization and China remains attached to centralization.
What's one thing about intelligence that the public don't know that you wish they did?
Well, I think the public assumes that intelligence is somehow clear-cut, that it's a purely rational, analytic activity. I think a lot of people think that intelligence is something that it's like solving a math problem, that if you know the equations and you know the most of the values that you can solve for the missing variable.
Yeah, it's like finding the only truth.
Yeah, finding the only truth. And this does not happen. I was somewhere yesterday and someone said, well, we have to eliminate all bias. And I went, this cannot be done. It is impossible to eliminate all bias in human beings.
What do you think are the biggest challenges intelligence communities are facing?
The intelligence community has defined its mission around the concepts of secrecy. Secrecy is an ancillary part of the intelligence process. Intelligence, I believe, is about sense-making and providing decision advantage. There are some situations where you need secrecy to achieve that. Absolutely. But should secrecy be the default mode of the intelligence community for most issues most of the time? No. And what's happening is that their secrecy model is weighing them down and slowing them down and making them less agile and making them less sensitive to change and making them walk away from the edge, like on purpose. Intelligence agencies stay away from edgy technologies because they're not sure that they're safe yet. And then meanwhile, years of stuff goes on that they're only vaguely aware of. I think the allegiance to secrecy, the confusion that occurs with thinking of secrecy as a primary function of the intelligence community rather than an ancillary function is hugely problematic.
Yeah, I've written about this as well, about the way that, digital has changed the role of secrecy and intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never quite understood the devotion to secrecy. I mean, of course, I completely understand some capabilities, sources, methods, techniques will be necessarily kept secret. But if you accept that in a digital world, more information is knowable or inferable, then surely you're placing a premium on those things that you want to keep secret. And in doing so, you also have to accept that so much more is not secret.
I learned this from a very good consultant once. And he said, if you treat everything like it's an exception, then nothing is an exception. And that's kind of how we deal with information. All information is exceptional. All information is sensitive. All information should be kept secret. And so therefore, it's very hard now to keep secrets.
What are some of the biggest threats or opportunities for technology and security that you see at the moment?
Well, obviously, everyone's talking about AI. I would like to see AI used, and I think it can be used to really explore how we think and enhance our thinking abilities. I don't know if you've ever done these scenario exercises where you get the 2x2 quadrant and to come up with the tremendous oversimplification of the 2x2 quadrant, good, bad, less good. and usually the facilitation session involves you coming up with hundreds of Post-it notes with everything you could think of that could affect this future that you're trying to imagine. I was always so disappointed when those hundreds of Post-it notes were reduced to the stupid 2x2 quadrant, which lowest common denominator contained almost no truth. And I always wanted to create a scenario generation machine that took all of those Post-it notes and just crunched them, just, every possible combination, and then laid them out using some kind of logic. Probably best to use different types of logic to sort of examine these scenarios. So, if I like this variable, no matter where you put this variable, what other combination of variables you put it with, this variable is always popping up and creating a mess. That would be useful to know, right? AI could do that. In fact, I've played with AI to give it variables and say, okay, give me 50 scenarios combining these 10 variables. I've never done that at kind of an industrial scale. I think it could be done in an industrial scale. I think technology could be used to better understand, I think, the more sophisticated, nuanced aspects of our thinking ability.
You can see there too the potential for so many different trajectories.
Yes.
There's just so much happening in the world. And, people often say, well, is true strategic surprise really possible in such an observable kind of digital world?
Oh, yeah, good question.
But when you start to look into events that have occurred, generally there always have been indicators, right? It's just that we weren't looking. That's pre-digital or digital. It doesn't really matter. And so the idea of being able to see what we could be looking at to identify things coming up, it's a great idea, and one that I think is really important. It's both intellectually and technically difficult.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
But it's now more possible.
Absolutely.
You can kind of begin to see the outlines of how you could tackle the problem.
The segment is called Interdependencies and Vulnerabilities. What are some of the interdependencies and vulnerabilities in intelligence that you wish were better understood?
Well, I've mentioned one already, vulnerability, that bias cannot be eliminated. I think an interdependence that I would cite is often not recognized, is our ability to know anything. Our ability to know is a function of our tools for knowing. So whatever tools, processes we use to know, to figure things out, determines how much we know. So I like to say, what was Galileo's profession? He was the best telescope maker in Italy. He happened to be born at the time that I think it was the Dutch figured out how to do the whole lens thing. And then he became the best telescope maker. So because he was familiar with the tool, that contributed to what he learned, the knowledge that he obtained. And so we in the intelligence community aren't as aware of of the deficiencies in our tools for knowing. We talk about gaps, but when we think about gaps, we go, okay, this is an area that we have to apply our tools to. But what we don't think about in terms of gaps is, we can only see this part of the light spectrum, and there's this whole other part of the light spectrum that we don't even have a tool for looking at, or the auditory spectrum. And there's probably a thinking spectrum. I think we're beginning to articulate it when people talk about the spectrum, but I think there's a lot more in there about our human cognition and then human and machine combined cognition that we don't know, and the fact that we don't understand it is a vulnerability.
So that's both the intellectual and philosophical gaps rather than the kind of collection gaps or...
A collection gap, right.
It is a very interesting conundrum, I think, for the IC to think about how you might answer radically new questions
Exactly.
without thinking about how you refine those down into like collection requirements and, kind of straight away shoehorn them into the capabilities you already have.
Exactly. Yeah, that's very well put. That when we confront a new problem, we just try to stick it into our existing capabilities without asking ourselves, are these capabilities really just, are they even relevant to this new issue that we're
Which
concerned about?
goes to your point about what does it mean to know something.
Exactly.
What's your key advice for leaders and change makers?
There's so much. I would say the first thing that a change maker, whether they're a leader or not, is they have to make your idea somebody else's idea. You need to make your idea community property. This can be very hard because you get the type A personality who wants to have credit. I get this asked this question a lot. What should I do when somebody else gets the credit for my idea? And our answer is celebrate, which, that's extreme. That's not completely true. But what we're trying to do is get over it, right? The objective is the betterment of the organization. The secondary objective is that you get the credit. That's tough, but I think it's a necessary truth for change makers. So, compromise your principles to get more people on board your change bus. I think this is essential. I think everyone that's in an organization needs to ask themselves, how many of my brilliant ideas can my organization tolerate in any given year? Once you ask yourself that question, and I often ask it live in a group, and I see the eyes open up, and people go, oh, because the answer is not all of them. And people will go, well, maybe one or two. So once you have that realization, then that will lead you inexorably to prioritize your ideas and pick the one that you feel most comfortable with, probably because it has the best chance for success. But that can involve many factors. It'll make your boss look good. It doesn't require new funding. You have another office that's ready to pair up with you on it, whatever, right? But, as a change agent, you can't pursue every one of your ideas, and organizations don't like those people, and they never will. So you need to prioritize, because the best thing that can happen to a change agent is a small success. That's the thing that will open up possibilities for the next one.
I feel like so often change makers are not especially good at communicating the mission connectedness of their need for change,
Yes,
often
that's right.
because something happens that they detect something, some kind of pattern recognition or, anomaly, and they go down some path of being, quite focused on that, but then bringing it in and being able to communicate the mission and the why for other people is something I think really needs a lot of focus on. And so I was really interested when you wrote an article for Forbes like a decade ago now, and in it, I'll put a link in the show notes. In it, you distinguish between
because I'd like to reread it.
good rebels and bad rebels, right? So, Emma, I'd like to ask you if you could take us through why good rebels are good for innovation and how leaders can identify and embrace them.
Wow. Well, good rebels are, mission focused, not me focused. I recall that. Good rebels don't want to break rules, but they want to change the rules. So when I was at CIA being a kind of rule-heavy culture, I knew the worst thing I could do would be to sort of recklessly ignore rules or flaunt them. So I had to, carefully play within the rules, maybe stretch them, but still, always have that defense that I'm within the rules. Earlier in my change-making life, I was more accepting of this idea, this sort of Silicon Valley idea of break everything. I bet there are kind of an equal number of important ideas that have advanced through sort of slow, patient, iterative change as have advanced through breaking things. I mean, I do think breaking things sometimes works. But if you're in a large organization, particularly the government, chances for breaking things to work are reduced. And good rebels are not trying to break things.
I would really add to that. A key part of government and the role of, national security agencies is to protect and keep people safe. So breaking things has a whole different element in there.
A lot of people, like from the business sector or whatever, governing is hard. It requires you to put uppermost in your decision-making process values that private sector companies don't normally have to worry about, like equity or not providing one side undue advantage. I mean, all of those things are critical to legitimate government.
Do you think that affects how much we can embrace change making, or do you think it just changes the kind of change making we need in public service institutions?
Here's a question that I like to ask groups all the time, and that I think government in particular fails. Any organization I'm with, I ask them, okay, can you describe the rate of change in your external environment? How much is your external environment changing every year? And they'll come up with different numbers. They'll say, oh, it's changing 5% a year. Depending upon kind of organization they're in, they'll go, oh, it's 20% a year, whatever. And the second part of the question, okay, if, we agree, it's 25% a year it's changing. And then I go, okay, if your outside environment is changing 25% a year, what rate of change do you need to have in your organization to keep up with your external environment rate of change? I get deer in the headlights. If the outside world is changing at 15% a year, then what percentage of change do I need to do a year? Probably you are not capable of doing 15%, but like maybe you could aim for 7 or 8, right? And then once you ask yourself that question, then you have to ask yourself, what is your strategy or your process or even your tactics for making that 8% change a year? How do you do that? Because, ideally, if the outside world is changing at 15% a year, that means that it will totally turn over in 7 or 8 years. And you as an organization have to do something equivalent to that at an admittedly slower rate. Because as a government organization, you cannot stop working. You can't go, okay, we're going to be offline for the next 2 years. Good luck. We just can't do it.
Right.
Because we're going to totally revamp. So, it's very challenging.
It would be cool to add to that a question of,
okay,
what shouldn't you change?
Oh, I love that. Yes. What shouldn't you change?
I think sometimes with so much external change going on, people become kind of overwhelmed. And a real key here, at least for, organizations that I advise, but also I think, the IC in government is, where are we staying still? Like, what is it that we've got right that we really need to keep
we can't
doing?
Yeah, exactly. What we're just describing is not that hard to do, but it just has to be done with intention
Regularly.
On a regular basis. And it's really important for government to do this. And it doesn't, and that makes me sad.
I always have a segment called Emerging Tech for Emerging Leaders. What do you see as the biggest shifts for intelligence leadership, specifically from new technologies?
I think the intelligence community has to figure out how to support our customers exactly where they are. So if they want to receive stuff via text, they should be able to receive stuff via text. If the ways that we like to communicate our intelligence are too different from the way they normally get their information, we are going to lose. It's absolutely true. When I was at CIA, the phrase I had in my head is, we have got to find a way to remain authoritative, but become less formal in everything that we do. And I think technology has the opportunity, gives you the opportunity. And, I would have these radical, heretical ideas that, why couldn't a policymaker just have a conversation, over instant messaging with an analyst? Oh my God, we would have no idea of what they said. Oh no. Oh. I believe all of those fears and concerns are tremendously overblown and are based on flawed premises anyway of how information works and how people make decisions.
You've just raised something which is so important. So meeting people where they are at is critical, because so often in this discussion, the link between the whole intelligence cycle and intelligence process and communication with the decision maker, it's treated as a process, right? Like it's treated as, here's another step. We're just going to communicate this to a decision maker. And the assumption is job done. Like I've done the communication part. But the point is that people make decisions in really different ways, and people actually need to receive the information they need at the time they need to make the decision in a way that influences their decision. Otherwise, it doesn't do the job it needs to do.
If you meant how can you use technology to become a better leader, I really think that the way we put together teams is suboptimal, because there's diversity of thought. We talked earlier about there's a cognitive spectrum that we do not understand currently. People are trying to understand it, but we do not understand. And so we need to become smarter about how to assemble cognitive talent to fulfill the mission. And small units like the Navy SEALs or whatever have figured out how to do this, but this is not done at scale. And so whenever I talk to people who work on talent or human capital or whatever they call it these days, I always say, this is the area you should be looking at. You should be the advisor to leaders who can bring really important things to the table, advice about how to assemble the team for maximum results. But instead, you just keep doing these transactional things that don't work very well. And I think technology is going to be a big part of that. If we ever get there, technology is going to be a big part of it.
Integrating complex technologies ethically asks a lot of us as leaders. You've held some really significant roles during technology and security developments in the intelligence community. How have you best led others through change in your career?
When people would ask me what my management philosophy was, I always had a one-word answer, which is conversation. You just cannot have enough conversation. Practically speaking, in the late 90s, I finally got the job that allowed me to start to experiment with what we call then publish when ready, 24-hour constant dissemination rather than this sort of newspaper cycle concept we were living under. And I was assembled a team to work on it. And I thought it was a great idea. I was very enthusiastic about it. But in the first couple of sessions, I could tell the meetings weren't going well and people didn't know what to do. Just by chance, I went off to a class in the Federal Training Center I think it was on program management. And we were presented with a 2x2 grid that nevertheless had a huge impact on me. When do you need to be highly directive as a leader? And when can you be very relaxed? The answer is obvious, but it had not been obvious to me. If we know exactly what we're doing, we've done it before, we're clear, and the people are competent, just let it go, right? If you're trying to do something new that's never been done before, you gotta be hands-on and you have to be directive. It's kind of like you can't be afraid to take a decision because it might be the wrong decision. If you have faith in your staff, once you make the decision, they will correct it for you. But if you make no decision, nothing happens. And if people don't know what it is you want out of this new initiative, they're not going to take any action on their own. So I came back and I said, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to do this. We're going to do this. And they went happily away, and we started making progress. Sometimes to lead people through change, you have to give them clear guidance in little bites that they can digest and do, and then gain confidence, and then you've established a track record, and now you can go to the next bite, right?
I wonder too if that insight could be reversed, and that is that for leaders whose natural style is authoritative and kind of, like take quick decisions, perhaps all leadership styles can learn to recognize what styles are needed in the moments.
Yes.
Then using the appropriate, because you're exactly right. Like at times you need to be more decisive and action orientated and give people clear decisions that they can go away and work on. And at others, it's completely appropriate to let people kind of, play a bit more and have that space. And both casual and formal approaches are relevant in there too. I just think it is natural.
No, it's a good point. There's a certain thing that's right for the moment. It's like in the military, right? Winning the military engagement is optimal, but retreating at the right moment to preserve your opportunity to re-engage is also optimal. Either one of those decisions can be good. What's bad is not it's kind of floundering.
Yeah. And leadership is understanding which one you need in each moment and being able to deliver it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'll go to a segment called Disconnect. How do you wind down and unplug?
I read broadly. I mean, when I say broadly, I mean broadly. I don't watch a lot. I'm not a watcher. I think this is one of my kind of old-fashioned fuddy-duddy things. I play pickleball, and I'm pretty competitive. I don't mean to suggest I'm very good at it, but I enjoy competitive things. I'm fascinated by how your mind works and the kind of extra thing that happens in your brain-body connection when you're competing.
And what have you been reading, listening to, or watching lately that might be of interest to the audience?
I've become very fond of YouTube as this incredible experiment in artisanal media production by everyone. And I really enjoy how the algorithm works, because every once in a while, it'll be like, surprise me with something. Like I've been binging on the Mitford sisters for some reason, only because the YouTube channel presented it to me. I'm currently reading Strolls with Pushkin.
And in my final segment, it's called Need to Know. Is there anything I didn't ask that would have been great to cover?
So you didn't ask me about being a Puerto Rican and a woman in the intelligence community. And there's a correlation between the fact that I'm not a Northern European wealthy man who went to a prominent university on the East Coast and the fact that I'm an unusual thinker. I mean, I don't perceive myself to be as unusual a thinker as others perceive me to be an unusual thinker, but I don't want to trade in stereotypes here. But I think I've always been more sensitive to sort of the arguments of the underdog, or the feelings of the underdog, or the concerns of the underdog, and less impressed by sort of power elite formulas.
Yeah, that's a really interesting insight. And how did you find being a Puerto Rican woman in the intelligence community?
No, I didn't think about it a lot at the time. So I'm Puerto Rican, but I went to high school in El Paso, Texas. That's a majority Latino community, Mexican-American, but Latino. So there was, people never spoke about it because it was like we were fish. It was the water. I didn't really become aware of that until I came to the East Coast. And then I realized that there was this, that we were othered. Not necessarily in horrible ways, but still that people looked at us and thought we were You know, kind of like, why are you here? Who are you? Why are you here? And I was very sensitive always to the possible perception that I was getting ahead for some kind of diversity, equity, quota reason. So I kind of underplayed it until I became kind of a middle grade. And I had a friend who said to me, well, now that you are this grade, you're free to be who you really are and say what you really think. What an important piece of advice. And because of this grade, that also means that more people will hear you and you will kind of have this more natural platform. I hadn't thought of that. And from that point on, I became very active in all sort of diversity, equity. I joined the Hispanic associations and started doing all the things that I had avoided doing earlier.
It's a common story. Unfortunately, I think many people tend to minimize their own individuality until they reach a level they perceive as senior enough to share that. But it's also part of why representation really matters, right?
Yes, of course. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you so much for joining me.
It was great.
Thanks for listening to Technology and Security. I've been your host, Dr. Miah Hammond-Errey. If there was a moment you enjoyed today or a question you have about the show, feel free to tweet me at MIAH_HE or send an email to the address in the show notes. You could find out more about the work we do on our website, also linked in the show notes. If you like this episode, please rate, review, and share it with your friends.